Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and this past week was filled with tons of updates with iOS, macOS, iPadOS, and more, as well as additional details about Apple's upcoming AR/VR headset and the actual OS that it runs, as well as the March event, and much more. This is your news update for the week of February 13th, 2022. And the first thing is, if you're an Apple employee, you may have already heard this, Apple is giving many retail store employees raises due to the current labor market, inflation, and staff complaints about working conditions amid the pandemic. And so those who are receiving the increases are mostly those who have been there since before 2020, but also in addition to that, Apple's increasing benefits such as 12 sick days instead of 6. So it's great to see them giving additional help to those that might need it that work for them. The next thing is Foxconn, who's a major assembler or supplier of iPhones after they're assembled, has said that the chip shortage is really easing and all of the different supplies to make iPhones is being more readily available so that we can get our iPhones on time. So Apple's working on the iPhone 14, also building the iPhone 13 still. And so during that, you need a ton of chips, RAM, and more. So it looks like the actual supply chain is easing as far as the shortages go. So that's great news. And while Apple is always working on new products such as iPhone 14, they're still working years out on maybe different innovations and different designs. And in 2021, this resulted in Apple being granted 2,541 patents for their different designs and ideas. So this makes them actually 7th in the top 50 of the patents this past year, with IBM, Samsung, and Canon ranking in the top 3. So lots of companies pushing out a ton of different patents. Apple's pushed out a lot as well. That could be anything from new designs to new ideas with the way things work, such as fingerprint sensors and much more. And while that chip shortage has started to improve, one bad piece of news actually has to do with Western Digital, where they said they lost 6.5 exabytes worth of 3D NAND flash storage from contamination in its plants in Japan. That may cause the overall price of the chipsets or the SSDs to jump to 10% due to demand. However, the Western Digital plants are jointly run with not just Western Digital, but also Kioxia, I'm not sure how you say that, but which is what Apple often uses alongside Samsung. So that's a joint plant with Western Digital, and it's unclear if that storage will need to be recalled from Apple products that were produced in January. However, it may cause a small shortage for SSDs, but again, Samsung is a huge supplier as well with those particular parts and things like that. Now, mentioning Samsung, they also announced the S22 Ultra this past week with a new CPU, but that CPU is still nowhere near as fast as the iPhone 13 series chips when you're running maybe Geekbench scores. Now, of course, Geekbench doesn't tell the whole story of usability and more, but with Geekbench scores, the iPhone 13 Pro Max often goes above 1700 for single core and above 4700 for multi-core. According to recent tests, the S22 Ultra scores somewhere in the realm of 1200 or 1232, as well as 3433 for multi-core. So definitely below that. However, that doesn't speak to the overall experience, and they're both very smooth. But in pure horsepower and raw power of processing, iPhone still beats it by quite a bit. But again, that really shouldn't affect the overall usability. The Samsung devices seem to be very smooth, and as soon as I can get my hands on one, of course, I'll have some testing with that. Now, if you've been on a Mac and all of a sudden maybe you're on a Mac and you get a pop-up that says you need to sort of accept some new terms and services for iCloud, this apparently is a problem a lot of people are having. So it's popping up, you clear it, and then it pops back up and asks you to sign it in or accept it over and over and over. So this affects not only M1 devices, but also Intel-based Macs, and it seems to be a known issue. So that could be related to the iCloud side or the chipset side inside Intel, but just be aware that it's something that people are seeing. Now, if you have an iPad mini, many people have complained about jelly scrolling. What that means is when you scroll up and down on a website, and this is an iPad Air 4th generation, but on the iPad mini, as you scroll, sometimes it's a little bit wavy until you stop. That's something that Apple has acknowledged. It's just sort of the way the display is made and the way they've constructed it. But now there's a new class action lawsuit against it in Northern California, where they say Apple is aware of it but refusing to fix it. Now, whether or not this goes anywhere is hard to say, as it's the way the construction of the display is made. So I'm not sure they can actually fix that, but it is something that's ongoing. And I'm curious, if you have an iPad mini, does this bother you? I have one, and my wife has used it and my children, and they haven't mentioned it once. I've never mentioned it to them, but they've never mentioned that it looks weird or anything else. So for most people, I don't think it will bother them, but if you're into displays or want the latest displays, you can definitely notice it when you're scrolling. So I'm curious to know what you think about that. Now, this past week, Apple made an announcement about AirTags, and they talked about how you can have more privacy with AirTags in the future. So it says an update on AirTag and unwanted tracking, and they give you examples of what they're going to do in future OS releases. So new privacy warnings during AirTag setup, addressing alert issues for AirPods, and updated support documentation, and they'll even make it a little bit louder. So if you have an AirTag, you're using it, and you're concerned about AirTags being around you, Find My will make it even more apparent if there's AirTags there that don't belong to you. So this will be coming in the near future, probably with an iOS 15.4 update or something along those lines. Apple recently acquired a music startup called AI Music that uses AI to generate dynamic soundtracks. This could be implemented within Apple Music to maybe improve auto-generated playlists, or maybe be added to your photo memories to improve the soundtracks there. Either way, we should see this in a future version of iOS, maybe iOS 16 or later on. Also, last year, Apple acquired a company called Primephonic that has classical music. So they were sort of a classical music only service, and Apple has said that they're going to implement that. Recently, in Apple Music beta for Android, it was found in the code that they were mentioning classical music. So we could see that pretty soon implemented into Apple Music, or maybe a separate app altogether. But I would imagine they'll put a separate section within Apple Music with dedicated playlists and more. So on Android, we've seen that already in the code. It looks like it's going to be pretty soon. Now, just a couple weeks ago, we had a bunch of software releases. This past week, we had a ton more. And so this past week, Apple released iOS 15.3.1, iPadOS 15.3.1, watchOS 8.4.2, macOS 12.2.1, and then also beta 2 versions of 15.4 on iPhone and iPad, watchOS 8.5 beta 2, tvOS 15.4 beta 2, and macOS 12.3 beta 2. All of those were released this past week. So it was a very busy week with updates. Of course, I have videos on most of those different changes. And then also many of you still ask me, when are we going to get iOS 15.4 beta 3 and when will it release to the public? And so I would expect that if we're on a current weekly cycle, typically after a couple betas, 2 to 3 betas will go to a weekly cycle. That means we could have a beta as soon as tomorrow or Wednesday. Now, if we don't see a beta this week, we'll still be on a bi-weekly cycle and won't see it until next Tuesday or Wednesday. We won't know that until tomorrow or Wednesday. So hopefully we'll see something this week. Now, if we do see a release this week, I would expect beta 4 next week, with a release candidate in the first week of March and a final release sometime in the week of March 6th. Probably around the Apple event that's expected on March 8th. So typically that's the sort of layout we'll see with those updates. That makes a lot of sense, where they'll introduce new features and new products around that time frame. And speaking of the March Apple event, we know a few more things about that. So we do expect it around the 8th. If we do have it around the 8th, we can expect an announcement in the maybe next week, or usually around that time frame is when we'll get invites to those events. And then we'll see different things at that event, such as iPhone SE 3. It's expected to look just like the SE 2 and maybe have Touch ID along with 5G. Of course, like I've mentioned before, if they're going to add 5G, they'll definitely need to add some battery. So maybe we'll see a slight redesign, because we will need antennas for millimeter wave. Also, we'll need larger batteries to compensate for the power drain that it uses. And the battery will need to be much larger, as the phone currently using 4G only gets about 4 hours of screen on time. So we would definitely need to see something change there. Also, we expect iPad Air 5th generation. So this is a 4th generation iPad Air. We can expect a 5th generation that looks very similar, with improved internals, improved cameras, and improved forward-facing camera with center stage. So center stage follows you around while you're on a phone call. It's very helpful when you're on a Zoom or FaceTime call, and something that's great. They should implement that here, but don't expect any major changes with iPad Air 5. Also, very recently in the Eurasian database, Apple always adds new products there, just like they added the iPhone and the iPad recently. They don't mention anything other than the model number, but they have added 3 new Macs. We expect a new Mac MacBook Air that looks similar to the iMac with different colors, as well as a MacBook Pro replacement for this 13-inch MacBook Pro, where it's said that they're going to be getting rid of the touch bar and just having improvements internally, such as an M2 processor. So we can expect that and maybe a Mac Mini. The 3 model numbers that were listed are A2615, A2686, and A2681. So those particular models, hopefully we'll see those updates very soon. And they've already filed, like I said, iPhone and iPad. So it looks like we could get those 5 different pieces of hardware at this update, hopefully some surprises as well. Also today, there were some tweets by Apple Tomorrow and Ross Young, who is a very accurate leaker, saying that the mini LED iMac Pro could launch in June. Some observers said no mini LEDs, but we hear around 1,000 zones and over 4,000 mini LEDs. So it looks like iMac Pro would be launching sometime in June, which makes sense that it would be around WWDC 2022, which is a developer conference, and would make a lot of sense to maybe see that device along with maybe a new Mac Pro at least mentioned there. Apple this past week also leaked the name of its upcoming operating system for its new AR/VR headset. It's often been referred to as ROS and now is actually showing RealityOS. So it's found within Apple's code. This is Apple's code themselves, so it's within that. We know it's called RealityOS, or at least that's the code name of it. Also, Mark Gurman this week said that he expects the new Apple headset to focus on using Memoji and SharePlay when you're using FaceTime. So you could use Memoji while looking across the table at someone else, maybe in sort of a virtual world in a conference call. You could use that. Of course, you wouldn't have to, but it would give you sort of a Memoji look since you wouldn't have a camera directly on you. Additional details of the headset leaked as well this week. Apple is aiming for a weight of 100 to 200 grams, which is actually less than half of that of the Oculus Quest 2 or Meta Quest 2. So to have something that light, hopefully with a good battery, would be incredible, very comfortable, and I can't wait to see what they have there. Recently, Antonio de Rosa released a concept of what Apple could be working on as far as a flip-style folding phone. Obviously, Apple's always working on new products and trying different things out, and this is kind of what it could look like if they were deciding to do something along these lines. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of folding phones, as I'd rather just have sort of a slab phone that's thin instead of folding it double thickness, but a lot of people really like the idea, and it's compact and sort of protects the display. So this is what it could look like, and Apple is said to be working on one. As far as release dates, though, we don't really know. And so that's all the news this past week. Tons of updates, tons of releases, and of course, I'm looking really forward to Apple's upcoming event where we'll finally see some new MacBooks and more. Let me know what you're looking most forward to again in the comments below, and if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already, though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.